Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and the A3 ranked season is wrapping up in just a couple of days. I can't believe that the ranked season, the second ranked season in Pokemon Pocket, is almost over. It went by super quickly. Every week we've talked about the best decks to play for ranked mode or for tournaments. Of course, that's what the channel is all about. But since there's only a couple of days left, I wanted to touch on a handful of decks that I believe will give everybody the best chance possible to not only hit Master Ball in the next couple of days before the ranked season ends, but also give you guys a great chance to climb in Master Ball to a high rank, as high of a rank as possible. That's what this video is really all about. Let's get right into the deck lists. I don't want to spend too much time. I am going to go ahead and plug the Discord and the Twitter. Link will be down in the description below. We're going to be kind of posting a little bit more down there, so I would appreciate if you guys go and check it out. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you enjoy my content and you're not subscribed, definitely hit that subscribe button. Also, we are going to be going live on Sunday. So we've accumulated a decent amount of rank points on my personal account. We're at like 1800. So what we're gonna do on Sunday is play kind of meme decks. We're gonna play basically all Sunday night, play a bunch of off-meta fringe kind of meme decks that are realistically not that good, and we're basically gonna see if we can drop all the way down to like 1450, how long it really takes. It should be kind of a fun stream. Again, I don't really care too much about, hitting top 5,000 or 1,000. So it should be a fun stream. We've accumulated enough points to give ourselves a bit of a buffer to spend an entire stream playing a bunch of really funny decks that probably aren't really good. So it should be a good time. Stay tuned for that. Links will be in the Discord. So if you guys are in the Discord, you'll be notified of that live stream. But we should be live Sunday night around 8:30. Should be a good time. So definitely stay tuned and check out that stream if you guys are going to be around. Okay, so the first deck list that we're going to talk about today, and actually the first two deck lists, are the decks that actually have been dominating tournaments over the last week or so. And these are, first of all, it's going to be Magnezone and Oricorio. So this, of course, did win the largest Pokemon Pocket tournament of all time this past weekend. Now, oftentimes, whenever a deck wins a tournament, you kind of see more counterplay towards that deck list. Now, one thing I will say is that this deck list wasn't nearly one of the most played decks of the tournament that it won. So it didn't have like a necessarily dominant performance. There's one other deck that definitely did have a dominant performance overall in the tournament, but this deck did win the tournament because it was sort of a counter to the counter meta, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's certainly a strong deck list, and I had to mention it because for the people that are still kind of riding the Oricorio train, this certainly is kind of the best way to play it. Now, I still think that its positioning in the format is fairly good. Again, in ranked mode, you're going to be playing a wide variety of different deck lists, but the upside to Magnezone and Oricorio is that it is phenomenally good against a variety of decks that you're probably going to be facing more often than not. If you're in Master Ball rank or climbing through Ultra Ball, whatever it might be, Oricorio is going to be really good against all of the Giratina decks, predominantly Giratina Darkrai. It's also going to be pretty useful against probably most of the fire decks. Now, a lot of the other matchups that you might hit, like Tapu Lele or Greninja or Meowscarada, certainly do well against Oricorio. I think that the format over the last couple of weeks has really kind of been built around the fact that Oricorio does hard wall a bunch of different decks, but that's why we're playing Magnezone, and specifically Magnezone, as opposed to like the Greninja and, Giratina variant of Oricorio. Magnezone is predominantly really good against Meowscarada, so grass is definitely really popular. If you're grinding rank battles right now, you're probably going to be facing a lot of different grass decks, and that's really where Magnezone comes in. So it kind of picks up the slack in that particular matchup that Oricorio can't really deal with, but in general, Magnezone is just a pretty strong Pokemon, and it's also good against opposing Oricorio. So I really like Magnezone, and I think that its positioning in the format right now has been massively increased for whatever the reason. It's kind of funny to see just like how good Magnezone ends up being every format. It just kind of finds its spot, it finds its pairing, and Magnezone's been relevant throughout this entire format, whether it's been with Oricorio or slotted into a variety of different decks. In fact, you'll see later in this video, sort of my #1 recommendation at the end of this ranked season might also include Magnezone. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, we're playing one Shaman in the deck list along with the Oricorios. That's basically just to give us kind of an auto-win scenario against Giratina and Darkrai if they aren't playing Kamala. And I think it's kind of worth running in that respect. Also against other Oricorios or against Darkrai in general, Shaman is just going to be a really good card to kind of negate some of that damage that we take from Nightmare Aura. So I think it's kind of worth playing Shaman. And to be fair, Giratina Darkrai still might be the most popular deck in any of the ranks in ranked battles right now. So playing Oricorio and Shaman should give you basically an auto-win scenario. You should have a massively high win rate in that particular matchup, but also Magnezone is going to help you in the grass decks, which are really common right now. We are playing 2 Professor's Research, 1 Lily, 1 Mars, 1 Cyrus, 1 Guzma. These are all really decent tech inclusions. Lily is to heal Magnezone, again, in some scenarios. Giant Cape does bring Magnezone up to 160 or Oricorio up to 90. That is certainly going to be relevant with the Lily healing and then also the Shaman healing. 1 Mars, every deck seems to be playing Hand Disruption. It's just kind of too good to not play, mostly for the sort of concept of card advantage, which definitely kind of comes into play more often than not. If you have 10 cards in your deck and your opponent has 5 cards in their deck, they're probably going to end up winning that game just by sheer happenstance of them drawing the cards that they need. So Mars really does help negate that. It is kind of the only counterplay to Professor's Research, but it can be good in the late game as well to reduce your opponent's hand, since we are playing an all single prize archetype, meaning that your opponent will almost always have a point in the game where they've taken 2 prizes, and then if we Mars them down to 1 card, that could certainly disrupt their flow of the deck and then reduce the chances that they have sort of one of those win condition cards. Cyrus is kind of needed to bring in Pokemon that we can't finish off with, like Oricorio or Magnezone, to take the KO. And then Guzma in general is really good. We talk about Guzma all the time. I think it's kind of worth running in most decks right now. I think a lot of decks are still running either Rocky Helmet, Poison Barb, or Giant Cape. The cool thing about Guzma is that you can actually take a KO with Guzma without attacking, right? So like if an opponent's Pokemon has a Giant Cape or a Leaf Cape attached, Leaf Cape's also very common in the grass decks, but they have less than whatever the HP is that the tool card gives them. Then if you play Guzma, then they go down to 0 HP and they just get KO'd. So it's basically a way to take multiple KOs in one turn. And then it also kind of acts effectively like Red against opponents that have Giant Cape, right? Because you're reducing their HP by 20, whereas Red, you're boosting it by 20. So Guzma has kind of taken over what Red was last format for most decks, and I think it's just a better, in general, a better card. It's also good against Giratina Darkrai in that particular matchup because they oftentimes do run like Rocky Helmet or Poison Barb. So yeah, here's the deck list. 1 Pokemon Communications I think is probably worth running because we're not playing Rare Candy. So we are reliant on getting that stage 1 evolution, the Magneton, out fairly early because it's kind of the way that we're going to be generating energies. So yeah, we're no Rare Candy and we're playing a stage 2 Pokemon. So you kind of want at least 1 Pokemon Communications. A really strong deck, really well positioned against a lot of the top decks of the format, but might not be my #1 pick for ranked battles. Now for tournament meta, that's a different story. I put this in the S tier of our tier list because I do think it's extremely well positioned from a tournament competitive standpoint, particularly like farming decks in day 2. Next up is going to be Meowscarada and Decidueye. We've actually spent a lot of time talking about this deck, and I made a video a couple of days ago playing this deck. It was a straight live stream highlight video, and it's really good. Honestly, if you look at the average win rates of decks throughout all of the tournaments over the last few days, really the last like week or two, Decidueye and predominantly Meowscarada is actually one of the best decks and the best Pokemon in the entire game. And it's just got a lot of support behind it. Meowscarada is one of those cards that is both good against Darkrai and Giratina and a lot of EX Pokemon having a lot of HP with Leaf Cape, being able to heal up with Erica's and with Lele, and doing a lot of damage against those EX Pokemon. So it really is sort of a counterplay. Plus we have Rare Candy now. So Meowscarada is that much better against all of those EX attackers and EX Pokemon. But the 60 damage and the high HP does give you an advantageous matchup against Oricorio, which again is a big reason why the Oricorio deck is playing Magnezone, because there's a few Pokemon that Meowscarada can't deal with really well, and one of those definitely is Magnezone. I think Rampardos is certainly one of them as well. So yeah, it's definitely a really, really strong Pokemon, but there are scenarios where Meowscarada isn't that useful. So you got to keep that in mind. In general, against sort of the other strongest decks of the game, I do think Meowscarada is probably one of the best Pokemon to play right now. Certainly one of the best, most well-positioned decks over the last couple of weeks. Your average win rate has been phenomenal throughout tournaments. So if that translates at all to ranked battles, which it should, this should still be a really top deck for you. Now, one thing to note is that most decks on the ranked ladder, especially in the high ranks, will be playing like 1 copy of Red Card or 1 copy of Red Card and Mars. A lot of hand disruption in the decks right now, so that is certainly something that can damper our deck list. But you know, it really kind of comes down to whether or not we draw the cards we need or opponent does, you know, find those hand disruption cards. Realistically speaking, we do really well against a lot of the best decks in the game, and it's still consistent even with all of the hand disruption flying around. Cry for Help is just such a strong ability. Rare Candy now kind of allows us to skip that stage 1 evolution if we don't find it off Cry for Help, if we just immediately find the Meowscarada. And then Decidueye is actually just phenomenal. 200 HP with Leaf Cape plus the healing from Erica's and Lele. It kind of is enough to just take down really any other Pokemon in the game in like a head-to-head matchup. Even against things like Charizard, if we are able to attack first and they don't have Lele, we can actually win that head-to-head matchup as well. So Decidueye is phenomenal. It's just a really, really strong deck list, and I kind of wanted to include it because it was the deck that dominated the last tournament last weekend, the largest tournament ever. more than any other deck. It's had the highest win rate, it had the highest day 2 representation, just an incredibly strong deck that's well positioned against a lot of the most common decks in the format right now, so it should translate well to ranked battles. Again, I wanted to cover these two decks right off the bat because they are sort of the hottest decks from like the tournament perspective and tournament results, but all of the decks following this, I think I actually have a little bit higher for ranked battles, mainly because their matchups are less specific and they are a little bit more tailored towards the entire variety of deck lists that you might be going up against in ranked battles. So you got to keep that in mind as well. So let's move on. So the next deck that we're going to take a look at is, of course, going to be Tapu Lele, Giratina, and Greninja. By the way, and I should mention this, but if we go back, this deck is playing purely lightning energies. I got to do better about talking about the energies that are in decks. I oftentimes just assume that people know what energies are being ran in the deck, but we'll mention them anyway. So this deck list here is playing only lightning energies. Yes, we're playing Shaman, but it's not an attacking option. Lightning energies is in this deck list does allow us to... Oh, did my mouse die? Hold on, my mouse died. I gotta change the battery. All right, we're back. RIP to my mouse. We had to change the battery. Okay, anyway, we'll edit that out for sure. Okay, so yeah, Magnezone, only lightning energies. The reason for that is so that we can kind of get Magnezone and attack turn after turn after turn with it. If we're playing Magnezone in non-electric type energy decks, then of course, it's kind of on a timer in terms of how many attacks we can do because it does discard a lightning energy every time we attack with it. And then, of course, Oricorio. So, of course, we're just playing lightning energies in this deck list. And then, of course, for Meowscarada Decidueye, we're playing grass energies. So, again, those probably didn't need to be mentioned, but some people ask, so I had to kind of go back and mention them in the videos. Okay, next up is going to be Tapu Lele and Giratina with Greninja. Now, again, some people do run water energies and psychic energies in this deck list, but I would say, for the most part, you definitely just want to play psychic energies. That allows you to consistently attack with Tapu Lele on your first turn if Giratina isn't on board, but mainly it allows us to double up on Giratina and get this particular Pokemon set up as early as possible on our bench. This deck list, to me, is still potentially one of the strongest decks in the entire game. It just has kind of everything going for it. It's all about bench sniping, 2 copies of Cyrus, and then Giratina to clean up KOs. With Giant Cape, Giratina goes to 170, so that does allow us to kind of take a KO with Giratina and then a live and attack from most other Pokemon in the game to then take another KO. If we do get Greninja out early enough, we can put an insane amount of pressure on our opponent just between Greninja and then attacking with Tapu Lele. But again, I think for the most part, what this deck wants to do is get your board full of Pokemon, particularly at least one Giratina. You would probably rather start with Tapu Lele in the active spot and then definitely bench a Froakie or two. And then I think, honestly, for the most part, and I'm talking about most games, what we want to do is like Broken Space Bellow and attach to Giratina for the first like turn or two. And then once Giratina gets set up with probably 3 energies, you don't really want to put too many more on it, onto it. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter unless you're going up against Tapu Lele, but you want to fully set up Giratina and then attach to the active Tapu Lele and then start targeting kind of whatever Pokemon that you would like to target, either with Tapu Lele or Greninja, which we might have been doing this whole time if we did find the rare candy combination. And then we probably do have Cyrus in hand. So again, against things like Giratina and Darkrai, what we can do is set up our Giratina faster than, of course, they can because they're playing dark energies. And then we use Tapu Lele or Greninja to target their benched Giratina that they're setting up. And then we bring it in with Cyrus, go into our Giratina, and then KO it. And then, of course, they don't really have anything that they can use to revenge KO us because Darkrai doesn't do that much damage, right? So especially with Giant Cape on Giratina, we can go in, Cyrus up there, Giratina, KO it, and then they just can't KO us back. And then we can, of course, Greninja combo with Giratina to take the KO. Or, again, just sort of finish off with Tapu Lele, even if Giratina goes down. So it's a really, really strong deck list against Giratina Darkrai specifically, but it's also going to be good against Oricorio. The combination of Tapu Lele and Greninja is certainly pretty strong. However, Magnezone can be tricky for sure, and we're going to talk about that later in the video. Now, the mirror matchup is really where this deck list gets a little bit degenerate. Unfortunately, the mirror matchup kind of comes down to, you know, whoever is able to basically get their Greninjas out early enough, because most players aren't just going to put energies on Giratina. It's a stage 2 target, so even if you do bench Giratina as like a pivot option, it's realistically not something you ever want to attach to because they're playing Cyrus, right? So anytime that you have energy on Giratina, even if you bench Giratina at all, gives them an opportunity to damage it with either Greninja or Tapu Lele and then bring it up with Cyrus and then KO it, right? So it's certainly not something we would like to put a ton of energies on, but at the same time in the mirror matchup, it really just comes down to who gets Greninja first because that comes down to who's ever doing the most damage per turn. Now, we are playing one Pokemon Center Lady and one Giant Cape, but in the mirror matchup, you probably just want to go ahead and use Tapu Lele and Greninja and just sort of ride out that way. I guess theoretically you could bench Giratina to kind of use it as like a bait, and then they bring it up, you take a hit, and then you retreat out for free. It's a little bit sketchy. It's not something I would really recommend, but if you were in a scenario where like you were behind on overall damage output in the mirror match, then you could technically utilize Giratina's HP to be a little bit, maybe a little bit cheeky there, but it's probably not something that's going to work out for you. The mirror matchup is very, very annoying. It really just comes down to who gets their Greninjas or Tapu Leles out early enough. And then it's really funny because like nobody attaches energies if like two Tapu Lele are staring down each other in the active spots. Nobody attaches energies until, of course, Greninja gets set up, and then you just sort of like it's absolutely terrible. Now there is some nuance to it, and depending on what your opponent does, you're going to change what you do. But for the most part, I think most people are just very passive in the mirror match. And that's a big downside for me with this deck list, that like if you're playing ranked battles, like and you play this deck and you hit the mirror match, it's just going to be absolutely ridiculous. But yes, one Mars, one Guzma, again, the kind of top tech inclusions in all of the decks. 2 Pokeball, 2 Research, of course, and then 2 Cyrus, and I think that's really the bread and butter of the deck, is kind of locking down your opponent and targeting which Pokemon you want to KO. Again, in most other matchups that aren't the mirror matchup, then, you definitely want to set up Giratina early and then utilize Greninja, Tapu Lele, and Cyrus to kind of pick and choose which KOs you want to take. It's an incredibly strong deck that's good against a lot of the best decks in the game, and I think it's certainly a big reason why I think it does well in tournaments, but also is still a really top choice in ranked battles, and a very balanced matchup spread across the board because this deck really can do everything. Giratina is strong enough to KO most stuff. Tapu Lele is really good in just a variety of different scenarios, and then the Greninja Cyrus combo is just absolutely insane. So here it is, probably one of the top tournament decks in the format right now as well. So I had to mention it. Certainly a decent option for ranked battles as well. And then next up, let's talk about some more interesting choices. So this is going to be Fire. Now, when I'm playing ranked battles, like Fire to me seems really, really strange, but it actually seems like a really good choice because in my experience playing Charizard in Fire decks on the ranked ladder is that you're not oftentimes going up against something that you can't deal with, because it's not like water is very common in the format. Any like water deck is probably playing, and we're playing fire energies for this deck, by the way. I don't know if I had to tell you that. Any water deck that's in the format right now, it just really isn't very popular, and it's probably just sort of some Greninja deck that's also playing water energies, which you can struggle with a little bit for sure. But for the most part, like fire decks are really well positioned because water is not common on the format. Grass is definitely common. Now, the only downside to playing things like Charizard, maybe even with Incineroar, is of course the fact that Oricorio is still fairly common. And then if we don't have a non-EX attacking option, Oricorio kind of does body us. So that's really where Turtonator comes in. Theoretically, if you take a look at the overall scope of the metagame, Turtonator and Charizard EX, this combination here doesn't really have any matchups that you can't win fairly consistently. Now, the deck itself isn't that consistent because we probably want to lead Turtonator, and then we probably want to Kiawe to it, and then after going through a Turtonator or two, we can go into Charizard and then sweep our opponent. That's really the bread and butter of the deck, but it doesn't always flow that way. Sometimes you lead Charmander and you don't find Charizard, or sometimes you lead Turtonator and you don't find Kiawe. So it certainly is a bunch of like 2 or 3 card combinations that don't always come to fruition, but if they do and this deck flows in the right order, theoretically you should be kind of built, like this deck is kind of built to take down really any other deck in the format. Now, you can play Charizard and Incineroar, which is still a really, really strong deck, but you're going to struggle against the Oricorio matchups for sure, no matter how you slice it. I know, Incineroar can burn, but Oricorio with the Shaman healing, with the damage it's doing, with the healing it's doing itself, and Pokemon Center Ladies, things like that, Giant Capes, it's just a tough matchup. So the thing with Turtonator is it absolutely destroys, your opponent's Oricorios, but it also does 1 KO Tapu Lele as well. And it does KO a Magneton with 80 HP. So the 90 damage from Turtonator is fairly relevant. And in the matchup against the other fire decks, it's also fairly relevant as well. I actually like it. I think the only deck list that we might struggle against might be some of the fighting decks if they happen to go like Rampardos early on. I don't necessarily know like what the bad matchups are for this deck list. It's a very interesting deck. It's something that always has like a decent win rate and a decent representation in tournaments, but never really either sees enough play or has enough success to like win or place high in tournaments. Although in smaller tournaments, it's certainly done fairly well recently. In ranked battles, for whatever the reason, it just ends up doing really well, at least in my own experience. And I know a lot of other top players have done really well with Charizard and Turtonator. So for me, I had to include Fire because, again, Grass is really common, and I think Fire is worth playing. But a lot of Oricorio running around, a lot of Magnezone, things like that. So I think Turtonator is certainly, in my mind, the option that I would choose if I was going to play a Fire deck in ranked battles right now. Again, it's worked really well for me, but it's not necessarily something that I would put at the top of my list. Certainly a really, really strong deck. So there it is. There's Charizard, Turtonator. Tulili, I think, is is necessary and 2 potions as well. I've seen some people just play a lot of healing, and it kind of makes sense. Like the 80 damage healing on Charizard, if you have Giant Cape, kind of effectively gives you to 280 HP, which is really strong. Not many Pokemon are able to do 280 damage over 2 turns, so it does kind of give you the advantage there. You technically, if you get that full combo off, you are able to live and attack 2 times in a row from like a Giratina, which is kind of crazy. So anyway, there it is. There's the deck list. And then again, Guzma, I know some people play red, but Guzma's just honestly kind of a better red in the format right now, because like if it just ends up being that way. Like sometimes it is better to play red, but I think Guzma in general is just a bit better, especially against like the grass decks when they leaf cape their Decidueye and you can't KO them. It feels kind of bad. Also like a giant cape on a like a Giratina, right? If they haven't attacked yet, we can't KO them. So Guzma's just a bit better, I would say, than red. But anyway, there it is. There's Charizard and Turtonator. Next up is going to be an interesting one. Some people might be a little bit confused as to why I'm recommending Gallade. The last couple of weeks, we've recommended Rampardos, and I do think the Rampardos is still a top deck in the format. I'm not discrediting Rampardos at all, but I just wanted to go ahead and talk about Gallade. Now, so even though Gallade is up on the screen right now, I still wholeheartedly recommend also playing Rampardos. Or not Rampardos, Garchomp. I would definitely recommend playing Garchomp because it's still a great card and a great deck. So keep that in mind. I'm going to showcase Gallade right now because it's kind of risen in success, but also risen in its overall viability in the format. So yes, I still love Garchomp, but with all the grass decks running around and becoming more and more popular, it's a little bit better for us to play an EX card that's not really weak to Meowscarada and Decidueye at the same time. Garchomp is weak to grass, so keep that in mind. I still love Garchomp. In fact, I think Garchomp is a better Pokemon than Gallade, but in terms of positioning, you're probably going to hit a lot of grass decks on the ladder. So playing a fighting deck that isn't just absolutely entirely weak to grass is going to certainly help you, I think, in a lot of different scenarios. There's also still a lot of Carnivine Arceus running around, so that's something to keep in mind as well. Gallade does kind of enough, honestly. When you pair it with Rampardos, it's got a lot of HP, and yes, it does do enough damage against most decks of the format. It is still a card in general that is going to struggle against Giratina. Giratina does kind of one-hit KO us, especially with a Darkrai ping, so yeah, that's the only downside, right? Is of course, like, we're playing Gallade, so we're not weak to grass, but we are still weak to Giratina. You kind of have to hedge your bets, but yeah, Gallade has been doing phenomenally well in tournaments over the last week, but also I think that it just makes sense in ranked mode because you still get the whole, Rampardos package, which is going to be really good against a variety of decks. It's going to hopefully auto win you against Oricorio and Magnezone, but it should also alleviate a lot of that pressure against the Meowscarada decks. Again, Rampardos is weak to grass, but we're hitting Meowscarada for 130, and Meowscarada hits us for only 80 damage. So theoretically, with Lele, we should be able to win that matchup head-to-head against Meowscarada, and Gallade isn't weak to Meowscarada, but it does, it should also do fairly decent in the head-to-head matchup against Decidueye. So keep that in mind. It's a really good deck list. I think that it's actually one of the more well-positioned fighting decks in the game right now. For whatever the reason. I think part of the reason why Meowscarada became so popular is because it was strong against really all of the decks that people were playing, whether it was Oricorio, whether it was Giratina, whether it was Darkrai, whether it was Garchomp in any of the Rampardos decks. So Meowscarada in Decidueye really kind of slid in and was by far the most positioned deck of the format, and Gallade said, hey, you know what? Like, I'm a fighting deck, but I'm not weak to grass, so why don't I slide in here? It's been doing really well. So as far as fighting decks go, I would actually maybe recommend over the next couple of days to be playing Gallade above something like a Garchomp, but I'm not discrediting Garchomp. It is still a phenomenal deck list, and in a lot of matchups, it's actually going to be a bit better. So keep that in mind. But yeah, there it is. I wanted to talk about at least a fighting deck, and Gallade has been on the rise. So it's something new, but something that you might be surprised at of how well it's able to do in a variety of different matchups on the on the ladder. Energized Blaze does, for only 2 energies, it does 70 damage. But does, I think, 20 or 30 more. We can click on just 20 more for every energy attached to your opponent's Pokemon. Now, again, Charizard is something that's fairly common. Charizard has 5 energies attached to it when it attacks, which means we're doing 170 to Charizard, and that's a KO. So that is certainly very relevant. And again, we do have enough to KO things like Darkrai and Giratina, I think, in most scenarios. So yeah, it's Gallade's a totally fine Pokemon. We also can, if we are going second, attack on our second turn if we rare candy into it. So it's not maybe as flexible as Garchomp, because Garchomp can attack on your second turn going first, but Gallade is still certainly really strong. We also have Teleport Ralts, which isn't necessarily something we'll do that often because the only thing we can teleport into is probably another Ralts or a Fossil, and that's not necessarily something that we would oftentimes want to do. But anyway, here it is. Here's Gallade. Yeah, it's kind of back. It's interesting. The format really has kind of come around full circle, and there's so many decks that are good. In this video, we have 8 different deck lists, and they're all kind of decks that I think are the most sort of well apt to, win games in ranked battles right now, so that's why I wanted to cover them. But yeah, I would say that it's certainly a strong deck right now in the format. Okay, next up are going to be sort of my 3 top choices currently. Again, if you're trying to hit Master Ball rank or if you're trying to climb high in Master Ball rank, these are the decks that I would play currently right now. The first one is just going to be Giratina and Darkrai. Now, this is not with Kamala, so again, we kind of flip back and forth. I think some people play Kamala in their Giratina and Darkrai decks. Some people don't. It really kind of comes down to like, you know, are we hitting just a ton of like Oricorio decks? Giratina and Darkrai is a deck that can win any matchup at any point in time, purely based off the fact that it's so consistent. Now, again, against Oricorio, that's going to be a tough one, right? Because any Oricorio deck is playing some healing, they're playing Giant Capes, they're playing Shaman to negate a lot of, or really half of the damage that we do with Nightmare Zone. So some matchups are kind of auto loses, and that's sort of the whole idea with playing Kamala. So you really kind of have to kind of balance whether or not you think Kamala is worth running, because Kamala is going to be really good against Oricorio, but it's certainly not very useful against most other decks in the game, and it's not something that we ever want to lead with. So it does make the deck a little bit less consistent. But listen, it's Giratina Darkrai. So if you wanted to play a deck that just you know, always had the potential to win, because it's the deck that I would say beats itself the least amount. You know what I mean? Like, it always kind of gets to where it wants to go fairly consistently, and we have so much room. It's very flexible. We have all of these different trainer cards that are useful. We have a red card, Mars. 2 Rocky Helmet is kind of the way right now. Again, we are a bit reliant against the Oricorio matchups and even like the Tapu Lele matchup sometimes to have Rocky Helmet attached, so that we're doing that extra damage. That's like 40 turn every turn on Oricorio, but they play Guzma, so it's really not a great strategy. But anyway, yeah, lots of healing with Pokemon Center Lady. We've got Red, Cyrus, Sabrina. It's a really, like, the standard do-it-all deck. Inherently, it's the strongest deck in the game. Luckily, we do have Oricorio in the format, because if we didn't, this deck would probably be by far and away the strongest deck for the format. Still, I know not a lot of people love Oricorio, but the truth is that Oricorio is really the main reason why Giratina and Darkrai hasn't completely taken over the format once again, which I am thankful for personally. Yeah, so that's kind of it. We're going to struggle against Oricorio, and then we are also going to struggle against the Meowscarada decks, theoretically, but again, with the hand disruption and the inherent inconsistency of the Meowscarada decks, we certainly always have a chance to win, although that matchup's certainly not going to be great for you nonetheless. But yeah, here it is, Giratina and Darkrai. I know some people think that this deck has fallen off, and in some tournaments recently, it hasn't done very well. Like, a lot of the most common decks probably aren't going to be very kind to you, right? Because that's what the format's really built upon. It's built upon, hey, are we able to beat Giratina and Darkrai? And then what else are we good against? Like, that's how we kind of measure and I guess scale a lot of the decks in the format. So maybe it depends. It really depends. Like, if you're playing a bunch of Oricorios and Meowscarada decks, then, you know, don't play Giratina Darkrai. But if you're playing against a lot of like all of the other stuff, then Giratina Darkrai is going to be really, really good. We have to talk about it because it is inherently the strongest deck in the game, so here it is. Now, my top 2 options are going to be kind of new decks that I don't know if we've really talked about much on the channel. And next is going to be Arceus Crobat, but this is a different version of it. This is a very ugly deck list, if I'm being entirely honest with you. So, like, this is Arceus Crobat, but instead of just playing Carnivine, we're playing just a 1/1 like Giratina Darkrai package. So we've kind of mashed the 2 archetypes together, and it may seem just absolutely ridiculous. It may seem completely degenerate, but there are some upsides to playing the deck list like this. The Giratina Darkrai package that we all know and love or hate is one of the strongest combinations in the entire game. Giratina is independent from really everything else in the game. So whether we're attaching energies to our Arceus to get it set up, or we're attaching energies to Darkrai to do some ping damage, we can Broken Space Bellow and set up a Giratina in the meantime. But because this, oh, I gotta go back, by the way. This, we've mentioned it, right? So this was playing fire, this was playing fighting. I keep forgetting to mention it because, like, it's to me, it's obvious what energies decks are running. But anyway, this is fighting energies, of course, and then this deck is playing dark energies. Giratina Darkrai plays dark energies. People comment this all the time. This deck has been around for like 3 months. It plays dark energies. Any deck that plays Darkrai EX is going to be playing dark energies, so keep that in mind, okay? All right, there it is. All right, next up, so like I was talking about with Crobat Arceus, the struggle with this deck always, theoretically, when you were playing Carnivine instead of Giratina and Darkrai, was that we were playing grass energies, which means we couldn't actually attack with Crobat, and we were very much reliant on getting Carnivine out early. Now, a big reason I think why the traditional Crobat, Arceus, and Carnivine decks saw so much success and why it won so many games was because in the format right now, inherently going second and leading off with Carnivine is one of the strongest leads in the entire game. There's very few things that can kind of keep up with it, and it kind of auto won a ton of matchups for you, but there's just a lot more scenarios where that doesn't, in the format at least right now, where it doesn't kind of carry enough for you. So when you're playing a deck list like this, you're playing Dark Energies, which again is the same as playing Giratina and Darkrai, but because we're playing Dark Energies, we can utilize the attacks of either Darkrai, Arceus, and we can attack with Crobat, which is actually pretty relevant as well. So it's a really, really strong deck in that respect, and I think that technically a deck list like this has the opportunity and the ability to beat any deck in the entire game. If you take a look at against like Meowscarada, again, Crobat is with like Giant Cape, and then yeah, with Giant Cape, we go to 113, which means that we are technically living 2 attacks from a Meowscarada. And then with Darkness Fang, we can attack for 50, but we're actually doing 30 more. So it's actually 80 damage per turn because of the Cunning Link ability if Arceus is on our bench. So that should be enough to not only take down Meowscarada, the 2 Crobats, but it should also be enough to take down Oricorio as well. So that's another big upside to this deck list, is that theoretically, like, yes, like Darkrai's weak to grass, and Meowscarada certainly doesn't doesn't hate going up against Giratina and Arceus. Like, these are all Pokemon that can just kind of get like rolled through by Meowscarada, but theoretically we can beat every deck in the game when we're playing this particular deck. So it does feel like a kind of a mishmash, like a really awkward combination of 2 like completely separate archetypes, but they actually flow together well. Like more than you would think. So and I honestly, like, that's the 2 decks that I have at the top of my video today and my rankings for ranked battles over the next couple of days are going to be decks that are just kind of going a bunch of different directions at the same time. And again, it does kind of seem like the deck would be less consistent, but to be fair, like the core consistency of the deck doesn't really matter if the deck can go so many different directions, right? Think about, like, if we lead with Giratina, you're like, all right, cool, like I'll just Broken Space Bellow, and then we have a Giratina. Oh, okay, I lead with Darkrai. Well, I can just attach to Darkrai and then do my thing. Maybe we lead with Arceus, which would be not beneficial, but again, we can still attach to it while we Broken Space Bellow on the bench here with Giratina. Maybe we start off with Zubat and we can go to Crobat and we have Arceus. So there's so many different like combinations of things that can be achieved with this deck list, and it can take KOs on a lot of different Pokemon in the game. We're playing, yeah, what is it? 6 different total basic Pokemon, so we should always have a full bench for Arceus's attack. We're playing 1 Dawn, 1 Sabrina, 1 Leaf, and 1 Professor's Research. When you're playing Arceus decks, you kind of have to play Leaf, because if you do lead Arceus, it's not great. And then, of course, 1 Dawn is certainly really good because of the free retreat with Crobat. It should allow us to like be able to attach to Crobat retreat and then bring that energy up and attack a turn earlier with things like Darkrai or Arceus. So that is certainly a viable strategy. 1 red card as well, just a common tech conclusion. 1 Pokemon Communications, I think, is certainly pretty relevant in a deck playing a variety of different Pokemon. And then Giant Cape, which again, most decks are just playing at least 1 copy of Giant Cape. So yeah, again, this deck list definitely seems kind of awkward, I would say, right? When you look at it, you're like, man, this deck can't be that good. But it is. Like, when you're playing ranked battles, like, you don't know what you're going to be going up against. You can't really tailor your deck list towards like your deck list choices based off of the decks that you're probably going to play, because it's not a tournament, right? When you're playing a tournament, like, you can get a general grasp of the metagame, and then hopefully if you hit day 2, you know kind of what decks you're going to be facing in day 2, and then you can kind of like hedge your bets in terms of what decks you should be playing. In ranked battles, it's not really like that. It really is like, okay, I should probably play a deck that at least can win, no matter what I'm going up against, and then that way, even though your deck might be a little bit less consistent than some other decks that have a very straight line strategy, at least we have the opportunity to beat decks no matter what we're going up against. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing at the top of ranked battles right now, are decks that are just sort of independent from their matchups and can just kind of take the W no matter what your opponent ends up playing. And this is certainly a deck that can do that. And I think it's a big reason why it's been such a high choice in ranked battles right now. Some of the highest ranked players in Master Ball rank have been playing this deck list or deck lists similar to this. So yeah, here it is. Okay, and now my number 1 option for this week, which might be personal bias, but this is something that has been absolutely phenomenal for me, at least over the last few days. Has been doing well in tournaments, but has also just been a deck that I think I've seen all over the place in higher or sort of, I don't know, like 1800 Master Ball rank. It's really, really good, and it is actually going to be, if it's going to load, is going to be Magnezone with Giratina and Tapu Lele. So another mashup deck list. And this deck list probably looks super ugly in my mind, but this is a deck that's playing Psychic Energies. Again, very akin to the exact same deck that's playing Greninja instead of Magnezone, but it's a little bit different. And again, the reason for that is because Magnezone is going to be extremely good in a variety of different matchups, predominantly against Meowscarada in the grass decks, which are so common, but it's going to be really good against other Tapu Lele decks, other Greninja decks, and other Oricorio decks. Magnezone itself is tremendously well positioned. And it kind of makes sense why we're playing Magnezone and Giratina together. Both of these cards, or Magneton and Giratina, can generate energies themselves. These are the two Pokemon in the game that kind of do that. So when you pair them together, you basically have two cards that can kind of independently build themselves up, and it kind of makes the deck a lot more consistently flowing than you might think. Tapu Lele seems to be the best partner for Giratina, especially when we're playing Psychic Energies. And again, for the same reasons that, it is in the Greninja deck with Giratina and Tapu Lele. We can commit all of our energies to Giratina, get it set up, and then have a Tapu Lele in the active spot, and then kind of target a bench Pokemon, and then bring it up with Cyrus. Now, we are playing only one copy of Cyrus in this deck list, and I think that 2 copies of Cyrus could be correct, but we're not as, I guess, reliant on it as like the Greninja Tapu Lele deck. So 1 copy kind of seems correct, and I think 1 copy of Red, 1 copy of Guzma, 1 Pokemon Center Lady, 1 Mars. A lot of tech inclusions in here. I think you could cut the Red for a Cyrus. You could cut Red for Pokemon Communications, which I think could be really good. I think Pokemon Center Lady is probably kind of needed, so is Giant Cape. There's just enough scenarios where it does sort of win you the game that way. And then 1 Cyrus. So I do think Cyrus is still really important to the strategy with Tapu Lele and Giratina. So maybe you cut Red, or maybe you cut another card from the deck for a second Cyrus, but this is a deck list that's sort of playing one of kind of every one of those tech inclusions that you might be wanting to play. That, of course, being Mars, Cyrus, Guzma, Pokemon Center Lady, Red, and Giant Cape. Those are all cards that are technically useful in a variety of different scenarios, right? So you never really know when they're gonna kind of win you the games, but they certainly could. So yeah, that's really what this deck list comes down to. It's the same old Giratina Tapu Lele strategy that we saw in other matchups. Tapu Lele with Magnezone can kind of win you games in its own right. And that's the thing about this deck that I actually kind of like quite a bit. Because we're playing Psychic Energies, we can consistently attack with Tapu Lele, and then of course Magneton just generates its own energy. So there are decks where we don't even draw Giratina, and we kind of just rely on the Tapu Lele Magnezone combination. There are some times where we don't have Tapu Lele, so we're reliant on Giratina and then Magnezone cleaning up the game. Sometimes we lead Magnemite and we can go into Magnezone early, and then just kind of hope that Giratina or Tapu Lele can finish up the game. So this deck list, for some reason, kind of melds together in such a way that it just can beat everything in the game. For reference, I've played about 21 or 22 games since yesterday with this particular deck. And I think I've only lost 3 games throughout that sample size. Again, it's not a huge sample size, but I've lost 3 games. And the only 3 games that I've lost playing this particular deck were against other people playing this deck. So for whatever the reason, it just does well against all of the decks that people are playing right now. Even the fighting decks, because again, we have Giratina, we have Tapu Lele. So it's really not that bad of a matchup against a lot of the fighting decks in the format. So it's just phenomenally strong. I also think fighting is kind of on the decline. I don't think a lot of people are playing the fighting decks because of grass. But anyway, Magnezone is just incredible. Tapu Lele can kind of take down Oricorio. So it's like you're playing Magnezone and Oricorio while playing the Giratina Tapu Lele Greninja deck at the same time. It really is sort of the middle ground between those 2 decks, which are some of the most well-positioned, strongest decks in the game. And again, it does seem weird that these cards would go together so well, but they do, because again, Magnezone and Giratina kind of just do their own thing. They set up their own energies, and then Tapu Lele is just such a useful card in the format. It's so good in a variety of different scenarios where it just sort of is kind of worth running. So yeah, there it is, guys. This is my #1 choice, actually, for the next couple of days. Like I said, on Sunday when I do my live stream, I'm going to be kind of tanking on purpose. I'm going to be playing meme decks and see how long it takes us to drop all the way back down to like 1,450 points, which should be fun. Not going to lie, it should be a fun experience. But for those of you that aren't looking to like tank your ranking in the last couple of days, if you're looking to climb and increase your ranking, this would be my #1 choice. Now, it can, again, if you haven't played like the Giratina Tapu Lele combination before, it is a little bit awkward in terms of like how you're playing the deck list, but there is a somewhat linear strategy when you're playing this deck, and it all comes down to like, all right, you want Tapu Lele in the active, you want to, Broken Space Bellow and double up on Giratina, get this thing set up, unless maybe you're going up against Tapu Lele, but get this thing set up while you set up your Magnezone, and then you kind of start just kind of picking and choosing which Pokemon you want to attack with Tapu Lele. And then after Tapu Lele goes down, we can go into Magnezone, and the combination of the Energy Arrow Tapu Lele and then the Thunder Blast for Magnezone is enough to take KOs in its own right. And then your opponent also has to go through Magnezone with 140 HP, so you can most of the time get 2 attacks off with Magnezone, sometimes 3, and then they also have to go through Giratina. So that's really the bread and butter of the deck, is that most of the time your opponent is forced to go through Tapu Lele, Magnezone, and then also Giratina. So it's really, really strong in that sense. And I think a lot of the best decks in the format right now either force you to go through 2 really strong EX Pokemon or 2 strong non-EX Pokemon. and then an EX Pokemon at the end. So that's really what this deck list does really well. Honestly, I don't really know what this deck could struggle against. I guess theoretically it could struggle against fighting decks, and I guess the Greninja Tapu Lele Giratina matchup can be a bit awkward, but Magnezone, if you do get it, just kind of carries you through that matchup. So yeah, it's really good. Like Tapu Lele, like Magnezone is really good against Tapu Lele, so playing Tapu Lele and Magnezone together allows you to kind of win that Tapu Lele mirror match a little bit better, whether it's against Greninja or not. So yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about this particular deck. It's just that good, at least in my experience over the last couple of days. And you know what? Magnezone has found its way to the top of the metagame, predominantly for the reason that I think a lot of the Pokemon that are seeing play are just weak to Magnezone, because people aren't really teching with Magnezone in mind. And if they are teching with Magnezone in mind, they're kind of thinking about Magnezone Oricorio, which is where this deck list really slid in and is kind of the best of both worlds, that really nice middle ground. Magnezone really, really strong against, Oricorio, against Meowscarada, against Tapu Lele. And then, Tapu Lele Giratina is just one of the best combinations in the game. So why not just kind of throw them all together? Again, playing psychic energies in this particular deck. So anyway, guys, there it is. Best of luck in the next couple of days. Hopefully this video was useful for you guys, and hopefully you guys all hit Master Ball rank or as high up in Master Ball rank as you possibly can. Like I said, we will be going live Sunday night. Should be a fun time, so definitely tune in if you want to. Check out the Discord, check out Twitter, like this video, and subscribe if you like this video. I guess like it, and yeah, if you like more videos, if you want to see more, and if you enjoy the channel itself, then of course subscribe. But anyway, you guys probably already know that I mentioned it every video. I just gotta mention it. It's what we do on YouTube, right? All right, yeah, let's get out of here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. We'll see you guys later, and yeah, bye.